The bar was quiet that night. Not dead, not lively, just quiet. The kind of quiet that sits heavy in your chest. You hear every clink of glass, every shift of a chair leg on the floor like it means something. A jukebox played low in the corner, some old doo-wop song barely filling the room. The smell of stale beer and fresh polish mixed in the air, and behind the bar, the guy wiped down glasses like it was a ritual. That's the kind of place Billy Batts came back to. He'd just gotten out, 6 years inside, doing time like a soldier, didn't rat, didn't cry, didn't make a sound. That used to mean something, and in the circles Billy moved in, it still did. He wasn't just a wise guy. Billy was made, untouchable in theory. Protected by that invisible shield the Mafia gave their own, the kind you don't break unless you're ready to die for it. He walked in with that kind of confidence, tall, wiry, in a black suit that looked like it had waited for him in a closet the whole time he was gone. The moment he stepped through that door, the air shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but if you were paying attention, you felt it. Billy had presence, that old school kind, like he belonged to a time when gangsters had rules and you didn't raise your voice unless you had to. At a table near the back, Tommy sat. Younger, wired, always twitching like a spark was ready to catch inside him. Next to him, Jimmy, calm, collected, older. He watched everything, said little. And then there was Henry, quiet, polite, not quite a kid, but still new enough to the life that his shoes weren't soaked in blood yet. Billy spotted them and smiled like he owned the room. And maybe he thought he did. He'd known Jimmy for years, had a history, real history, the kind you can't buy or fake. He walked over, arms out. "Hey, look at these guys. Jimmy, you fucking mutt, you still breathing?" Jimmy stood up, gave him that tight-lipped grin. They hugged, the kind that starts warm and ends stiff. Henry shook his hand. Billy gave him a once-over, like he was scanning a resume in human form. Then he turned to Tommy. That's when things shifted. Tommy, my boy, heard you're doing good. Heard you're making a name for yourself. What, you still shine shoes?" The words hung there. Tommy smiled. Sorta. That smile that's more teeth than anything else. "Nah, Billy. I'm doing all right." Billy clapped him on the shoulder, maybe harder than he needed to. "Yeah? You got your money from that last shine you gave me?" Then he laughed. Loud. Real loud. It wasn't a joke. Not really. Not to Tommy. Not in front of Jimmy and Henry. Not after the time Tommy'd put in building his name. He wasn't some errand boy anymore. But Billy wasn't just anyone. He was made. That gave him the right, at least on paper, to say whatever the hell he wanted. Tommy didn't say much after that. Just stared down at the table, jaw tight, eyes cold. Henry caught it, the shift in mood. Jimmy caught it too, but no one said a word. The drinks flowed. Billy talked like he'd never left. War stories from inside. Who flipped, who didn't. Who died, who's next. The kind of talk that doesn't leave the walls. But all the while, Tommy sat quieter and quieter. His hands didn't stop moving, fingers drumming, foot tapping, mind racing. That's the thing about respect in this world. It's not about age or time served. It's about who's laughing and who's the joke. And Billy, he forgot the streets had changed. He didn't see that Tommy wasn't that kid from years ago, that the laugh was a cut. And sometimes, one cut is all it takes to start bleeding. Later that night, when the bar was nearly empty, Jimmy leaned back, lit a cigarette, and watched Tommy out the corner of his eye. "You all right?" he asked, voice low. Tommy didn't answer right away. He just stared at the glass in front of him, like it held something more than whiskey. Then he said, "I'm fine." But his tone said otherwise. Billy was in the bathroom, singing, off-key, loud, like a man without a care in the world, and outside on the quiet street, the night waited, because something had started, something quiet, like a storm miles away, but it was coming. And sleep? Sleep wouldn't be part of it for any of them. The next few days passed like smoke, thick, slow, hard to hold on to. Tommy didn't talk much, not to Jimmy, not to Henry, not to anyone. He just moved through the days like something was ticking inside him. quiet on the surface, but you could feel the weight in the air when he entered a room, like whatever was bothering him wasn't going to go away on its own. Jimmy noticed it. Of course he did. Jimmy noticed everything. That's how he survived as long as he had. He didn't just look at people, he read them, like books full of crossed-out lines and hidden margins. He saw Tommy pacing the back hallway of Salerno's deli after they picked up the weekly envelope, saw how he rubbed the side of his neck like something was crawling under his skin. "You gonna talk about it, or let it rot in your chest?" Jimmy asked one morning while they waited in the car outside a numbers drop in Queens. Tommy didn't answer at first. He lit a cigarette, rolled the window down just enough to flick ash. Then finally he said it, real quiet. "He disrespected me." Jimmy didn't need to ask who. The words weren't important. The tone was. He looked straight ahead. "He's made." Tommy's lip curled. "So what?" Jimmy turned his head slowly, eyes narrow. "So what? You know what that means. That ain't like hitting a guy over a card game. You touch a made guy, you sign your own death certificate. You, me, anyone even near it." Tommy shrugged like the rules never applied to him, and maybe that was always his problem. The street was full of guys like Jimmy, smart, quiet, dangerous only when pushed. But Tommy, he was a storm looking for somewhere to land. A wrong look, a laugh at the wrong time. That was all it took to flip his switch. "You were there," Tommy said. "You saw how he looked at me, like I was still 15, running shines and wiping down fenders." Jimmy stayed quiet. He didn't like to agree with something that couldn't be undone, but he had seen it. That smirk, that clap on the shoulder. Like Billy thought he could just walk back into the neighborhood, wave a few hands, crack a few jokes, and pick up where he left off. Like the last 6 years didn't change anything. But it had. People changed. Streets changed. Power shifted. And Billy? He was a ghost trying to wear skin again. Later that night, they met at Henry's place, a little house tucked behind a pizza shop in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy. Just a basement with a pool table, a TV from the 70s, and the smell of marinara creeping in through the vents. Henry poured drinks. Scotch, no ice. "Look," he said, handing Tommy a glass. "I know he rubbed you the wrong way, I get it, but he's connected. If anything happens to him, the fallout don't stop with you. It hits all of us." Tommy leaned back, drink untouched. His eyes stayed on the floor. "He thinks I'm weak. That's the real crime here." Jimmy leaned forward, voice sharp now. "No. The crime is thinking about laying hands on a made guy and dragging us down with you. You think those guys up top are going to care how you felt? They don't give a damn about your pride. Tommy, they care about rules, about structure. You break it, you're dead. That's it." But Tommy was already gone. Not physically, but in his head he was somewhere else. Maybe back in that bar, replaying every word, every laugh, every smug look Billy threw across that table. Tommy never forgot anything that made him feel small. And Billy had done just that. He finally drank. One long pull. Then he stood. "I'm not saying we got to do anything now. I'm just saying people forget where they stand sometimes. And sometimes they need to be reminded." Jimmy and Henry shared a glance. There it was. The storm had landed. For a few days after that, things went quiet. No talk, no plans, just business, collections, drops, favors, same routine. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was tight, like a piano wire pulled too far. And then, one night, it broke. Billy was back at the bar, same suit, same grin, celebrating again, this time with a couple of old friends from the inside. Guys who didn't know the neighborhood had shifted. Guys who still thought Billy was someone the world respected. Henry got the call around 7 p.m. "Come by," Tommy said. "We're giving Billy a real welcome home." That tone, too calm, too steady, that was when Henry knew it was already decided. He got there late. Place was half lit. Billy stood by the jukebox, punching in songs with grease on his fingers. A few old guys played cards at the other end of the bar. Nobody noticed anything strange. Tommy stood by the door, one hand in his jacket, eyes on Billy like a man watching his own future burn. Jimmy sat at the bar, drink in hand, face unreadable. When Henry stepped in, Tommy looked at him and smiled. Not a happy smile, a dead one. "We're just talking," he said. Billy turned around, grinning. "There he is, the quiet kid. Sit down, have a drink. What are we celebrating?" Tommy stepped forward, slowly, calmly, like he was taking a walk down a hallway he'd built in his mind. "Celebrating you," he said. "Big man coming home. Big mouth still working?" Billy laughed. "Still sore about the shine joke?" Tommy didn't answer. Billy looked over at Jimmy. Jesus, this guy ever let things go? And then it happened. Fast, brutal, ugly. Tommy hit him first, a glass to the side of the head. The sound was sharp, like something cracking open a shell. Billy staggered, confused more than hurt at first. But then Tommy kept going. Fists, elbows, kicks. Henry froze. Jimmy didn't stop it. He didn't help either. He just watched. It wasn't a clean kill. It wasn't quick. Billy fought, clawed, bled. But in that basement of a bar, the same one he walked into like a king, he died on the floor with no crown, no shield, no protection. Just blood on tile and silence where his laugh used to be. When it was over, Tommy stood over him, chest heaving, face splattered. "No one disrespects me," he said, like he was talking to a ghost. Henry finally moved. He looked at Jimmy. "What now?" Jimmy lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled slow, like the act itself bought him time. "Now," he said, "we clean." And they did. They wrapped the body in plastic, bleached the floor, dumped the clothes, moved fast but not frantic. It was rehearsed. As if some part of them knew it would come to this all along, they loaded the body into the trunk of Henry's car, 3 grown men, 1 dead weight. It took all of them. The drive was long, cold, the kind of drive where no one talks because the silence is louder than anything they could say. Billy Batts was gone, but not the consequences, and as the city lights faded behind them and the night swallowed the road ahead, one thing settled heavy in the car, heavier than the body in the trunk. They had crossed a line, and the price would be waiting. Somewhere, somehow. Because you don't kill a made man and walk away clean, no matter how quiet the night seems. The drive back was quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind that buzzes under your skin like an itch you can't reach, the kind where every little sound, a car horn 3 blocks over, the hum of tires on asphalt, even your own breathing, feels too loud, too sharp, like the whole world is listening. Henry sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, watching the black blur of trees whip by. His hands were still damp from the bleach. The smell was burned into his skin, no matter how hard he scrubbed in that gas station sink. Every time he inhaled, it clawed at the back of his throat. Jimmy drove like he always did, steady, eyes forward, both hands on the wheel. The kind of calm that didn't feel right, not anymore, not with what they had just done. Tommy sat in the back, legs spread wide, chewing a toothpick like it was an old habit. He looked out the side window, jaw tight, eyes blank, like he was waiting for something. Maybe the guilt to come, maybe the regret. But it didn't. Not yet. And that was the part that scared Henry the most. They didn't speak until they hit the bridge. The city lights shimmered in the distance, too far to touch, but close enough to remind them they weren't free yet. Jimmy broke the silence first. "We don't talk about this. Not now. Not ever. You understand?" His voice wasn't angry. It was cold, like a man reading the weather, stating facts. Tommy nodded without looking up. "Who's talking?" Henry didn't answer. He just stared ahead. Every light on the bridge looked like a spotlight. Back in Brooklyn, they went their separate ways. No handshakes, no backslaps, just quick nods and hollow stares, like strangers leaving the scene of a wreck. Henry walked the 4 blocks home like his shoes weighed 100 pounds each. Every step felt too loud. Every shadow looked like it was watching him. When he got inside, his wife was asleep on the couch, the TV still on, some sitcom laughing at nothing. He turned it off, walked past her, and went straight to the bathroom. He stripped down and got in the shower. Hot water, scalding. He wanted it to hurt, needed it to, but the blood was already gone. Only the smell was left. He stood under the water for what felt like hours, but the feeling didn't wash off. His skin felt raw, like he'd been peeled open from the inside. He dried off, dressed in silence, and sat on the edge of the bed until the sun came up. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Billy, laughing, bleeding, quiet. The next few days passed in a haze. Business went on. Collections were made, hands were shaken, smiles were worn like masks. But underneath it all, the cracks were forming. Tommy acted like nothing happened. He laughed, joked, played cards like he was invincible. Like the rules had changed and he was the new god of the street. But people noticed. They always notice. Jimmy was colder than usual, calculating. His mind was always moving, always 2 steps ahead. He started watching people, watching the way they looked at them, the way they hesitated in conversation. And Henry. Henry was falling apart. He wasn't built like the others, not really. He had the stomach for the life, or so he thought. But this wasn't numbers or collections or roughing up a guy who missed a payment. This was different. This was permanent. Billy was made. And you didn't just make a made guy disappear without someone somewhere noticing the hole. They tried to play it cool, told anyone who asked that Billy had skipped town, that he was laying low, that maybe he went back to Vegas or Florida or the old neighborhood in Jersey. But you can only sell a lie so many times before someone checks the receipt. One afternoon, about a week later, Henry met Jimmy behind a butcher shop where they used to stash extra cash in the freezer. They leaned against the alley wall, both smoking, both pretending everything was fine. Jimmy exhaled slow. "You hear anything?" Henry shook his head. "Not yet, but people are asking." "Who?" "Frankie, Tony's kid. Said Billy owed him some cash from before he went in. Asked where he was. Asked why he ain't returned his calls." Jimmy nodded slowly. "We keep saying the same thing. He's out of town, maybe Florida." Henry looked down. "For how long?" Jimmy's eyes narrowed. "As long as it takes." Then he flicked his cigarette and walked off. No goodbye. That night, Henry couldn't sleep again. Not from guilt. Not anymore. Now it was fear. Because once a lie starts to rot, the stink gets everywhere, and the stink had started. Tommy didn't seem afraid. But maybe that was the scariest part. He carried himself like nothing touched him, like he was too fast for bullets, too smart for suspicion. One night at a card game, he even joked about it. "Billy? Hey, he's probably dead in a ditch somewhere," he laughed, tossing chips onto the pile. "Guy had a big mouth, bound to catch up to him." The room went quiet. Nobody laughed, because deep down, they all knew. And that's when the whispers started. They always start slow. A look here, a question there, a quiet conversation behind a closed door. "Where's Billy?" Last time anyone saw him, he was with Jimmy and Tommy. "Did you ask Henry? He's been real jumpy lately." It doesn't take much. In this life, paranoia spreads like gasoline on a lit floor. And the worst part? You never know who's pouring it. One morning, Henry was sitting in his car, just watching the street. The same street he'd grown up on, the same stores, the same sidewalks, the same old men sitting on crates outside the bakery like they had nothing better to do. But now, it all looked different. Colder, darker, like the street knew. His hands were shaking, not a lot, just enough that he couldn't keep the cigarette between his fingers. So he sat there, empty-handed, heart pounding, wondering how long it'd be before the phone rang, before the knock came, before someone sat him down and asked questions he couldn't answer without signing his own death slip. Because that's how it worked. You mess with a made guy, there's only 2 ways out, the coffin or the can. And both feel like the end. By the end of the week, Jimmy called a meeting. Just the 3 of them. No outsiders, no ears. They met at an old garage Jimmy's uncle used to run. Empty now. Smelled like oil and dust and ghosts. Jimmy didn't waste time. "It's getting hot. People are looking, asking." Tommy leaned against the hood of an old car. "Let 'em. They don't know nothing." Jimmy's voice was sharp. "They don't have to know. All it takes is one guy getting nervous. One guy trying to earn points by opening his mouth." He looked at Henry. "You good?" Henry didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. But Jimmy saw the fear in his eyes, saw how it never left. Even when he blinked, Tommy scoffed. We handled it. Nobody saw nothing. Nobody heard nothing. This is all in your heads. Jimmy stepped forward, slow, deliberate. You ever kill a made guy before, Tommy? Tommy didn't answer. Jimmy kept going. It ain't like hitting some punk on the street. There's rules. There's consequences. That badge he wore? It wasn't just for show. It meant something. And people are going to come looking. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. He let that sit. Then, we lay low. We keep our mouths shut. And we pray the ground don't give him back. No one spoke after that. Because there was nothing left to say. Just the quiet. And the fear. And the weight. Because once you bury a secret this deep, you better be sure it stays there. And in their world, nothing stayed buried forever. A week passed, then another, and the silence that once gave them cover began to feel more like a spotlight. People were still asking questions, not loud, not in the open, but in hushed voices behind deli counters, in back rooms of social clubs, and through half-closed car windows late at night. Nobody said Billy's name outright, not at first. They'd say things like, "You seen him around lately?" Or, "He was supposed to stop by last week." Or, "He's still in the neighborhood?" But the way they asked, eyes narrowing, lips tightening, it was clear they weren't curious. They were testing. Jimmy started getting calls, not from strangers, not from nobodies, from people that mattered. People who sat at long tables in high-back leather chairs, sipping espresso like it was holy wine. The kind of men who didn't raise their voice unless a war was about to break out. First, it was Paulie, then Sonny, then someone higher. A voice Jimmy didn't name, just said, he asked. That was enough. "What do I tell them?" Jimmy asked Tommy one night over the phone. "Tell him he's gone. Moved down to Tampa, starting fresh." Jimmy stayed quiet, then said, "That only works for a while. Sooner or later someone makes a call, or flies down to check, or digs. Then we deal with it," Tommy said flat. "Like we dealt with him." Jimmy didn't respond, just hung up. Tommy never feared much, maybe because he never thought long enough about consequences. But Jimmy had survived too long to act like time was on their side. And Henry had stopped sleeping altogether. The guilt didn't just live in Henry's chest, it seeped into every corner of his life. His wife noticed it first, the way he'd stare off during dinner, or how he'd flinch when the phone rang. "You okay?" she asked one night, her voice low. "You've been somewhere else lately." Henry forced a smile. "Just business." She didn't believe him, but she knew better than to push. In their world, business meant everything and nothing. It meant don't ask. It meant stay out of it if you want to sleep with both eyes closed. Still, she watched him. Watched how he started pacing at night, walking from window to window like he was expecting someone. Watched how he jumped at knocks on the door. Watched how he started drinking earlier, heavier. He barely touched food, and his eyes, they were turning hollow, like something inside had started leaking out. One morning, around 10 a.m., Henry walked into Sal's deli to pick up a brown envelope behind the counter. Standard drop. Routine. Sal looked nervous. He handed over the envelope, then wiped his hands on his apron like they were dirty. "You hear?" Sal said. Henry didn't look up. "Hear what?" "They found something, out by the old junkyard." Henry's spine stiffened. "Yeah?" Sal nodded, voice low. "Not much left. Some teeth, some bone, no face. But they say it was bad." Henry's heart dropped into his stomach. "Cops?" he asked. Sal nodded. "Couple detectives came around this morning, asking about Billy." Henry kept his face straight. Years of practice. He slid the envelope into his coat pocket. "That right?" Sal didn't push. He just looked Henry in the eye. "I didn't say nothing." Henry gave a nod, then walked out. But the street didn't feel the same anymore. It felt like a fuse had been lit, and the explosion was coming. That night, Jimmy called. His voice was sharp. No greetings, no small talk. "They're looking." Henry didn't ask who. He already knew. "They pulled me in," Jimmy said. "Didn't charge me, just questions, friendly stuff. You know how they do it, but it's starting. Henry gripped the phone tighter. They know? Jimmy paused. Not yet, but they will if we keep acting like we already got caught. What do? We shut up, we act normal, we smile, we collect, we don't crack, you hear me? Henry didn't respond right away. Then he said, Tommy ain't helping. Jimmy let out a bitter laugh. That kid never helps. He just drags bodies behind him and expects someone else to mop the blood. There was a silence. Then Jimmy added, if they come to you, you never saw him that night. You left early. You don't know where Billy went? That's it. Henry nodded, even though no one could see. Yeah, got it. 2 days later, 2 detectives showed up at Henry's door. Not in suits. Not official. Just 2 guys with cups of coffee and thin smiles. They knocked twice, stepped back, and waited like salesmen trying to sell God. Henry answered, already dressed like he was expecting them. Henry, the taller one said, nodding. Mind if we ask you a few things? Henry opened the door just enough to be polite. Depends what about. Billy Bentvena. Henry leaned on the frame. He ain't around. Heard he moved south. Yeah, so we heard. A lot of people say that. Funny thing is, none of them saw him leave. Henry shrugged. Maybe he didn't say goodbye. Maybe, the other one said. Or maybe something happened. Henry narrowed his eyes. You accusing me of something? The taller detective smiled. Nah, we're just talking. We heard you were tight with Jimmy and Tommy. We're all tight. The second detective sipped his coffee. You were with them the night of Billy's party, yeah? Briefly, Henry said. I left early. Had stuff to do. They nodded. Anyone vouch for that? My wife. More nods. Then one of them leaned in a little. Henry, off the record. If something happened, now's the time. Made guy or not, you're not the one who swung the bat. Henry stared at him, then said, You done? They backed off. For now. But as they walked down the steps, Henry knew they'd be back. Because that's what cops do. They circle, and they wait for someone to break. Back in the neighborhood, Tommy was getting louder. He started spending more time in clubs, drinking more, gambling harder, telling stories with that smug smile that made people nervous. One night, he got into a shouting match with a made guy from another crew over a bad hand in poker. The guy tried to walk away. Tommy threw a glass at his head. Henry heard about it the next morning from a bartender who couldn't stop sweating when he told the story. Kid's gonna get us all killed, the guy whispered. Henry didn't say anything, just lit a cigarette and walked out. But in his gut, he felt the truth. Tommy wasn't just reckless now. He was radioactive. And if the heat kept rising, someone up top was going to handle it. And in their world, handle it only meant one thing. Jimmy called another sit-down. Quiet, private. They met in the back of a florist shop Jimmy's cousin ran. The kind of place where no one asked questions and the lilies always smelled stronger than the stench of fear. Jimmy looked tired, older. We're running out of time, Henry nodded. I know. Cops are circling. Higher-ups are whispering. Someone's going to make a move soon. You think it's coming down from the top? Jimmy didn't answer, because they both knew the answer was yes. You talked to Tommy? Henry asked. I tried. He thinks he's bulletproof. Henry stared at the floor. He's not. No, but he's not going to see it coming. That's the problem. They sat in silence a moment. Then Jimmy said something Henry had been fearing for weeks. If it comes down to it, we may have to give him up. Henry looked up, eyes wide. You serious? Jimmy nodded once, slow, final. He made the mess, he's going to have to clean it, one way or another. And just like that, the life they knew began to crack, from the inside. The first time Henry realized the life didn't love him back, it wasn't loud. It didn't come in the form of a gun pressed to his temple, or flashing red and blues in the rearview mirror. It came on a Wednesday morning in the back of a bakery, with powdered sugar in the air and an envelope short by $200. Small thing, on paper. $200 in a world where they skimmed thousands without blinking. But the guy who ran the bakery, Tony Delgado, had always been solid, always counted twice, always paid on time. So when Henry asked where the rest was, Tony didn't argue, didn't lie. He just looked at him and said, "I heard things." Henry stared at him, jaw tightening. "What things?" Tony shrugged. "You know how people talk. I just figure if there's trouble coming, maybe I don't want my name too close." Henry took the envelope anyway, but he didn't say another word. He just walked out, got in his car, and sat there for 5 full minutes without starting the engine. The streets used to feel like home. Now they felt like they were trying to push him out. Later that day, he met Jimmy at the diner off Flatbush, the one with the torn leather booths and the best corned beef in the borough. They didn't sit at their usual spot by the window. Jimmy said it was too exposed. They picked a corner booth instead, backs to the wall, eyes on the door. Jimmy lit a cigarette before even taking his coat off. His face looked rough, not tired, just worn down in a way that never came back. "More guys asking about Billy," he said, exhaling slowly. Henry stirred his coffee. "No sugar." "Same question?" Jimmy nodded. "Same tone, too, like they already know, like they're waiting to see which one of us cracks first." Henry looked down. "You think they'd go that far?" Jimmy didn't answer, didn't need to, because they both knew the truth. In this life, suspicion was as good as guilt, and guilt meant permission to erase you, quietly, permanently. Henry leaned in a little. "You said it yourself? If we give them Tommy," Jimmy cut him off. "I said maybe. I said if it comes to that." Henry's voice dropped. "It's coming. You see the way he's acting? He's not just drawing heat, he's pouring gasoline on it." Jimmy nodded, his jaw clenched. "I'm not saying we turn rat. I'm not saying we hand him over to the feds or the street or anyone else." "Then what are you saying?" Jimmy looked him in the eye. "I'm saying, if it's between him or us, it's gonna be him." Henry didn't respond. He didn't have to. The look on his face said everything. The brotherhood was breaking. Meanwhile, Tommy was spiraling. He wasn't hiding. If anything, he was doing the opposite, flashing money, throwing parties, mouthing off to guys higher than him like the world owed him respect. And respect was the word he kept clinging to, like a man drowning with nothing left to hold but pride. Henry saw him one night at Rico's lounge, tossing bills around like they were napkins. A couple of girls on each arm, mouth moving a mile a minute, like the more noise he made, the less he'd hear what was coming. When Henry pulled him aside, Tommy looked annoyed. "What?" "You gotta cool it," Henry said, voice low. "You think nobody's watching?" Tommy scoffed. "Let 'em watch. You keep talking like that and you won't see who pulls the trigger." Tommy stepped closer. "You worried about me? Or yourself?" Henry didn't blink. "Both." Tommy stared at him for a second, then smirked. "You were there too. Don't forget that. You stood there while I did it. You didn't stop me. I didn't start it either." Tommy's smile faded. And for the first time in a long time, Henry saw something crack in his eyes. Just for a second, like a flicker of doubt. But it vanished. Tommy leaned in, voice almost a whisper. "You thinking about talking?" Henry felt the heat rise in his chest. "You threatening me?" "I'm saying," Tommy said, stepping back, "you go down, we all go down. So maybe keep that in mind next time you want to play priest." And just like that, the line was drawn. By the end of the week, word was out. Not official, not confirmed, but whispers had grown teeth. The bosses wanted answers. The body they found, it wasn't identified, but it was enough. Enough for suspicion, enough for moves to be made behind closed doors. Jimmy got the call, short, cold. "We need to talk." That was all it said. He told Henry the next day. "They want to sit down, all of us, me, you, Tommy, Friday night, Salerno's." Henry's stomach sank. "That ain't a sit-down," he said. "That's a setup." Jimmy nodded. "Could be, or it could be our shot to control the story." "What story?" Jimmy looked out the window. "The one where we live." Friday came fast. Henry didn't sleep the night before, didn't eat all day. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He tried to tell himself it was just nerves, but it wasn't. It was instinct, something primal, something that whispered, You're not walking out of this one. They met outside the restaurant, neutral ground. Inside, the back room was already set. Round table, 4 chairs, dim lights, too much silence. Tommy showed up late. Of course he did, grinning like he owned the place. "Hey, the whole gang's here," he said, slapping Henry on the back. Nobody laughed. 2 of the bosses were already waiting, both older, both dangerous in the way still water hides depth. They didn't waste time. "We've heard things," one of them said. "We're not accusing, but we need clarity." Jimmy did most of the talking, calm, polite, controlled. He told the story. Billy left town, got into it with some guys in Jersey, had debts, disappeared, probably laying low. They nodded, pretended to believe it. Then one of them looked at Tommy. "You got a big mouth," he said. "You've been making noise. That brings heat. We don't like heat." Tommy smirked. "I was celebrating. That a crime now?" The room went still. Jimmy leaned forward. "Look, if there's questions, ask them, but don't hang this on us just because someone disappeared." The older boss looked at all 3 of them, slowly, like a man weighing meat. Then he said, "If we find out someone broke rules, real rules, it gets handled. Doesn't matter who." He let the words hang in the air. No one moved, no one breathed. Then he stood up. And just like that, the meeting was over. But the message was clear. If someone talked, if someone confirmed what they already suspected, there'd be no second chances. After the meeting, the 3 of them stood outside. Cold wind, empty sidewalk. Tommy lit a cigarette, hands shaking just a little. "Well," he said, exhaling, "that wasn't so bad." Henry looked at him like he didn't recognize the man anymore. Jimmy didn't say a word. Then Tommy turned to leave. "I'm heading to Philly for a couple days, lay low, like the old men said." And he walked off, didn't look back. Jimmy turned to Henry. "You feel that?" Henry nodded. "Yeah." Jimmy looked up the street. That was the sound of the end. And he wasn't wrong, because by the time Tommy came back from Philly, the streets weren't waiting for him. Something else was. Tommy came back from Philly 3 days later. No warning, no heads up. He just showed up at Louie's bar like he never left, wearing a leather jacket, laughing loud, acting like the world was still his and nobody had said otherwise. Henry heard about it from Frankie, who called just past midnight. "You hear?" Frankie whispered. "Tommy's back." Henry sat up in bed, heart already pounding. "Back where?" "Back here, drinking, telling stories like nothing ever happened." He even joked about Florida again, like Billy's tanning somewhere. Henry ran a hand down his face. Who was there? Everyone. That word hit hard. Everyone. That meant the lie was dead. The silence was broken. That meant someone, somewhere, was going to carry this to the wrong ears, either for leverage, for loyalty, or just to stay alive. Henry didn't go back to sleep that night. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and thought about that meeting in Salerno's, the way those old men spoke without raising their voices, like judges preparing a sentence. Thought about Jimmy, standing outside in the cold, saying, that was the sound of the end. Maybe the end had already started. Maybe this was just what it looked like when the foundation cracked beneath your feet and nobody wanted to admit the floor was falling. The next morning, Henry met Jimmy at the parking lot behind St. Anthony's. Church bells were ringing, funeral bells. Henry always hated that sound, like someone cashing in a final debt. Jimmy was smoking, leaning on the hood of his car, staring at nothing. "Tommy's back," Henry said. Jimmy nodded. "I know. He's talking. I know. What are we going to do?" Jimmy didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a manila envelope, and handed it to Henry. Inside was a name, a time, a place. Henry stared at it for a long time. "You serious?" Jimmy's voice was flat. "They gave the green light." Henry looked at him stunned. "He's not made." Jimmy's eyes didn't move. "Doesn't matter anymore. He's a problem, and problems get solved." Henry wanted to speak, wanted to ask if there was another way, wanted to say they could pull Tommy aside, talk to him, scare him straight. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew that wasn't an option. Not anymore. Tommy had passed the line, too loud, too wild, too proud to shut his mouth, and now he was a threat to everything. Henry handed the envelope back. "You do it." Jimmy shook his head. "It's got to be both of us." "Why?" "Because we were both there. We both saw it happen. We both cleaned it up. If anyone gets left standing, it sends the wrong message." Henry exhaled slowly. "He trusts us," Jimmy nodded. "That's why it'll work." They planned it for a Sunday morning. No noise, no drama, just like business. They told Tommy it was a meet, something quiet, private, upstairs at an old warehouse they used for stash jobs. "Bring gloves," Jimmy had said. "We're moving some stuff." Tommy showed up late again, smiling again, wearing sunglasses like he'd just stepped off a movie set. "You two look like you're at a funeral," he joked, stepping inside, slapping Henry on the back. "Something like that," Jimmy muttered. They led him upstairs. Empty space, no windows, just crates, dust, and the cold. Tommy didn't notice anything. Why would he? These were his guys, his brothers. They stopped in the middle of the room. Jimmy turned to him. "We need to talk." Tommy's smile dropped a little. "About what?" "You." He frowned. "What about me?" Jimmy glanced at Henry, and that moment, that tiny pause, was enough. Tommy stepped back, eyes narrowing. "What the fuck is this?" Henry swallowed. His mouth was dry. "You've been talking too much." Tommy laughed, but it was thin. "Jesus, you two serious? You think I'd talk?" "You already did," Jimmy said. "I was joking." "You think I'm ratting? Me?" Henry took a step forward. "You're not just risking yourself. You're dragging us with you." Tommy's eyes were wide now. Betrayal, rage, panic, all mixing in his face. "You're gonna kill me, after everything?" Jimmy didn't say anything. Henry looked away. Tommy's voice cracked. "You ain't got the balls." He turned to walk, maybe to run, but Jimmy was faster. 2 shots, quiet. Tommy dropped, no scream, just surprise. Like the ground disappeared beneath him. Henry stood there, frozen. Blood on his hands, his shoes, his soul. It was done. Just like that. Another problem solved. Another ghost in the basement. They buried him the same way they buried Billy. Deep, quiet, anonymous, no name, no marker, just dirt, and silence. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was something else. Something heavier. Something like the final nail in a friendship that never had a chance to grow old. Henry didn't talk much after that. He stopped going to card games, stopped taking late calls, stopped answering the door after dark. The life hadn't just changed, it had shaped him, warped him into someone he didn't recognize, who wasn't afraid of jail anymore, or death. He was afraid of himself, of what he'd become. He'd done everything right, followed the code, paid his dues, stayed loyal. And now, he was alone. Jimmy still checked in now and then, always the same tone, cold, businesslike, like 2 survivors trading notes on a sinking ship. But Henry knew it was only a matter of time before someone came for them too. Because secrets like this, they don't stay buried. They rot. They bubble up. They spread. And when they do, everyone starts pointing fingers, and no one wants to be the last man standing. A few weeks later, Henry got a call from a guy he barely knew. Said a Fed had come around asking questions, nothing specific, just sniffing. "Thought you'd want to know," the guy said. "Your name came up." Henry hung up without saying a word. Then he sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at the wall. Because deep down, he knew what came next. The house of cards was shaking, and there were only 2 ways out. Either flip or get buried next. Sleep didn't come easy after Tommy. Not that Henry was sleeping well before. But after that, there was something different about the silence in his house. It wasn't just still, it was accusing. The walls felt like they were watching him, like they knew what he'd done. Every sound made him jump. A car door slamming down the street. He checked the blinds. A phone ring in the middle of the night. He didn't answer. Even the hum of the refrigerator at 3 a.m. got under his skin, like a whisper from the other side of a confession booth. He started drinking earlier in the day, just to take the edge off. First it was coffee with a splash of whiskey, Then, it was whiskey with a splash of nothing. By noon, he'd be numb enough to walk down the block without feeling like every pair of eyes knew his secret. But they did know. They had to. Guys in the street had changed the way they looked at him. Not directly. No accusations, no pointed questions, but they looked through him, like he was a window, and they were trying to see what he was hiding behind the glass. And the ones who didn't look at him at all, they were worse. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the second call came. This time, it wasn't just some guy from the neighborhood giving him a heads up. It was a lawyer. "You need to come in," he said flatly. "They've got questions. They're calling people in. Quiet for now, but it's happening." Henry didn't speak. The lawyer sighed. "They haven't arrested anybody, but they're circling the drain, and your name's still in the bowl." That night, Henry drank until the bottle was dry. His wife asked what was wrong. He told her it was business. "Everything's always business with you," she said. But she knew it was more than that. The man sitting across from her at the dinner table wasn't the same one who used to laugh with his eyes, who used to throw her over his shoulder and kiss her in the kitchen just because he could. This version of Henry, the one who barely spoke, who flinched when someone touched the phone, he was someone she didn't know how to reach, and she was starting to wonder if she should try. He met Jimmy a few nights later in the parking lot behind a bowling alley they used to hit up in their teens. Jimmy looked worse than he did. Eyes darker, face sunken, clothes baggier like he'd dropped 10 pounds off stress alone. "I got pulled in," Jimmy said. Henry's heart sank. "When?" "Yesterday. Sat me down for 2 hours, didn't charge me, just played games, asked questions they already knew the answers to. Names, dates, who was where and when." Henry tried to keep his voice steady. "Did you say anything?" Jimmy shot him a look. "You think I'm stupid?" Henry looked away. "No." But the silence that followed stretched too long. Jimmy leaned in. "They're coming, Henry. You feel it, don't you?" Henry nodded. Jimmy lit a cigarette, hands shaking just slightly. "They've been building this case for years, since before Billy. They're just waiting for someone to crack." Henry said nothing. Jimmy narrowed his eyes. "You ain't thinking about talking, are you?" It was a question asked like a statement, like an early warning shot. Henry stared ahead at the empty parking lot. "No." But his voice didn't sound convincing, not even to himself. The truth was, Henry had been thinking about it for days, not flipping, not testifying, nothing that clean. But he was thinking about what came next. If Jimmy went down, and he was going down, Henry would be next. They were tied together. Billy, Tommy, the bar, the cleanup, the lie, everything. And once the bosses knew the feds had even sniffed around Jimmy, they'd assume the worst. That's how it always worked. Guilt wasn't proven, it was assumed, which meant there'd be no trial for Henry, no jail, no last phone call, just a quiet drive home one night and a car that never made it. He saw it all so clearly now. His future wasn't 5 years from now. It was maybe 5 days, maybe less. The next morning, he did something he never thought he would. He went down to the corner diner, sat in a booth, waited. And when Agent DeMarco, the same Fed who'd been shadowing the case for 3 years, walked in, Henry waved him over. "You serious?" DeMarco asked. Henry nodded once. "I just want to talk." They sat in silence for a moment. DeMarco didn't even reach for his recorder. Not yet. "You know what happens if you sit with me," he said. "There's no going back." "I'm not giving up everything," Henry said. "Not yet. I just want to know what you know." DeMarco leaned back. "We know a body was found. We know it had a cracked skull, broken ribs, teeth scattered like change in a glove box. We know Billy was at that bar that night with you, Jimmy, and Tommy." He paused. "We know Tommy disappeared." Henry tried not to react. "We know you and Jimmy met a week later. We got traffic cams, phones pinged, witnesses, kinda. Enough to raise eyebrows." He leaned in. "And we know you're the only one who hasn't lawyered up yet." Henry said nothing. Because what could he say? The diner conversation didn't end in handcuffs. It ended in suggestion. DeMarco slid a card across the table. "Call me when you're ready." Henry didn't touch the card. He just nodded, stood up, and walked out. But something shifted in that moment. He had entertained the idea. He'd sat at the table, and in this life, that was enough to brand you a traitor. Even if you said nothing, even if you never said a word again. That night, he went home and pulled every curtain tight, disconnected the phone, sat in his chair with a drink and a loaded .38 in his lap, not because he planned to use it on himself, but because he figured if the door broke open, he might get one shot off, might take one of them with him. The paranoia wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a presence, a weight, a voice that followed him around the house and whispered, "They know." Even his wife had started watching him differently, less out of love, more out of preparation, like she was getting ready to live without him, like she already knew he was gone. By Friday, the decision was made. Not spoken, not written, just made. Henry drove to a payphone 2 towns over, waited until the street was empty, then dialed the number on DeMarco's card. The agent answered on the second ring. "I'm ready," Henry said. There was a pause, no surprise in DeMarco's voice. "We'll be in touch." That's all it took. A 5-minute call. After years of loyalty, silence, brotherhood, it came down to 5 minutes. He'd broken the code, not with a bang, but with a whisper. And the ghosts in his life, Billy, Tommy, even the man he used to be, would never forgive him. But they were dead. And Henry? He still had breath in his lungs. For now. There's a moment after betrayal, after the decision is made, where the world feels frozen. Not peaceful, just still. Like it's holding its breath, waiting to see how long you'll last before the first crack shows. For Henry, that moment lasted about 36 hours. After the call, he didn't hear back right away. No cars, no knocks, no whispers on the street. He went back home, sat in the same chair, curtains drawn, gun in his lap, eyes on the front door like it was holding death back with nothing but a cheap chain lock. His wife barely spoke to him, not because she knew, not exactly, but because she felt it. She'd lived with him long enough to recognize the signs, the long silences, the too clean bathroom, the way he flinched at every sound that came from the hallway. She wasn't stupid. She just didn't ask questions, because some answers come with a body count. It was the 3rd day after the call when Jimmy showed up. No phone warning, no knock. Just the sound of gravel under his shoes and a quiet voice from the porch. "Open up, Henry." Henry knew that voice better than his own heartbeat. He took a breath, put the gun under the cushion, opened the door. Jimmy stepped inside like he already owned the room. No coat, just a dark sweater, black gloves, and that look. The one Jimmy wore when he already knew the answer to the question he hadn't asked yet. "Sit," Jimmy said. Henry sat. Jimmy stood for a moment, staring at the walls, at the pictures, at the mess, like he was memorizing everything before it got torn down. Then he finally spoke. "Tell me it ain't true." Henry didn't say anything. Jimmy turned slowly, his eyes sharp but his voice quiet. Too quiet. "Tell me you didn't sit down with them." Henry looked away. "I didn't give them anything," he said. "That's not what I asked." The silence that followed was worse than a scream. Jimmy walked over, sat in the chair across from him, leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I've known you since you were 16. I taught you how to run envelopes, how to talk to guys who were twice your size. I kept you alive when every other kid your age was either dead, broke, or in prison." Henry nodded slowly. "I know." Jimmy's voice cracked then, just a little, enough for the pain to show. "I loved you like a brother, Henry. You were family. And now, you're just another rat with a ticking clock." Henry swallowed the lump in his throat. "I didn't give them anything." Jimmy stared at him like he was already a ghost. "Doesn't matter. You gave them you. That's all they need." He stood, wiped his hands on his pants like he'd touched something dirty. "You know what happens next?" Henry nodded. Jimmy walked to the door, paused. "You got maybe a day. If I were you, I'd be gone before midnight." Then he left. Didn't look back. Didn't slam the door. Just walked off into the dark like he'd buried a body. And in a way, he had. Henry didn't run, not right away. Instead, he sat there for a long time, just listening to the silence. It was louder than ever now. No more pretending, no more lies. He was dead to them. Worse than dead, he was marked. Because in their world, death was one thing, but betrayal? That was a cancer they had to cut out fast, before it spread. By morning, he had a bag packed, nothing dramatic. Just clothes, a burner phone, cash from under the floorboard, and a picture of his wife from 10 years ago, back when things were still simple, before blood, before ghosts. Oh, he didn't say goodbye to her. She was still sleeping, or pretending to. Either way, it was better that way. He walked out into the cold with nothing but the sound of his own footsteps. It was like leaving his own funeral. He drove north, kept to side roads, didn't stop unless he had to. Every gas station felt like a trap. Every car behind him felt like a tale. By the time he reached upstate, he hadn't slept in 2 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw sore from grinding his teeth, his hands shaking. But he was alive, and that counted for something. The feds set him up in a motel first. Nothing fancy. Just a 2-bed place outside Albany with peeling wallpaper and a broken vending machine. But it was safe. For now. DeMarco came the next day. Same suit, same half-smile. "You're lucky," he said. "Jimmy's old school. Most guys would have put 2 in the back of your head and been done with it." Henry didn't respond. DeMarco opened a file. "You ready to talk?" Henry nodded, and just like that, it began. He gave them what they wanted. Names, dates, deals, bodies, not everything, but enough to move the pieces, enough to build a real case, enough to light a fuse that would burn all the way back to Brooklyn. And while he spoke, while he signed the papers, while he accepted the new name and the new identity and the hollow safety of witness protection, something inside him cracked, because it wasn't just his life that ended. It was the code, the brotherhood, the part of him that once believed there was honor in the life. That part died the moment he walked into that diner and opened his mouth. Months passed, arrests were made, raids, deals cut, reputations destroyed. The news covered it like it was a movie, flashing names, mugshots, connections. Crime family topples in internal collapse. Brooklyn bloodline shattered by informant. Former mob associate testifies in historic case. Henry didn't watch the TV. He didn't want to see Jimmy's face in cuffs. Didn't want to hear the recordings, the wiretaps, the testimonies. He already knew the damage. He could feel it. Because when you kill the code, it doesn't die clean. It rots. It seeps. It haunts. One day, while tucked away in some small, nameless town under a name that wasn't his, Henry woke up and couldn't remember what day it was. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. He wasn't the sharp kid from the Bronx anymore. Wasn't the loyal soldier. Wasn't even the traitor. He was just nothing. No family. No friends. No purpose. Just a man in a witness program with a broken soul and too many memories. And that's when it hit him. The street never killed him. The feds didn't save him. He buried himself. With every lie he told, every body he helped hide, every secret he kept. And when he finally broke the silence, it wasn't an escape. It was just a slower death. The town they dropped him in was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed since 1962. One grocery store, one gas station, one bar with no neon, no jukebox, just 4 stools, and a bartender who wore his belt too tight. People waved at you from their porches whether they knew you or not, and the air smelled like burnt leaves and diesel. It wasn't bad, not really, but it wasn't his. Nothing was his anymore. The name on his license wasn't real. The address on his papers was temporary. The job he'd been handed, bagging groceries at a store that played country music through static speakers, was the kind of thing you gave a man you didn't plan on being around long. Every face he saw was unfamiliar, and that should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Because when no one knows you, it's easy to start forgetting who you are. Henry had never been a saint, never pretended to be. He knew what he signed up for when he got into the life. You don't shake hands with the devil and complain when your palms smell like blood. But he used to believe there was a structure to it, a kind of broken honor. a crooked loyalty that still had rules. You don't rat. You don't steal from your own. You don't kill made guys. You don't talk to feds. You don't flip. And then he did. He sat with DeMarco, gave them names, confirmed whispers, drew maps, pulled the thread that unraveled everything. Jimmy, the old crews, even guys Henry liked, guys who never wronged him. He told himself it was survival, that Jimmy would have done the same, that if the gun had turned on him first, Jimmy wouldn't have hesitated to pull the trigger. And maybe that was true, but it didn't make the nights easier. It didn't make the silence go away. He lived in a small, rented house on the edge of town, just past the train tracks where no one walked after dark. There were cornfields to the left and a half-burned barn to the right. The house had one bedroom, creaking floors, and a heater that coughed more than it worked. The neighbors didn't ask questions, just waved when they saw him, and Henry waved back. He was polite, quiet, routine. But in the back of his mind, he always wondered if someone had recognized him. If some trucker passing through saw his face and remembered a headline. If some bartender cleaning glasses late at night was piecing it all together. And maybe they weren't. But the fear stayed anyway, because he knew. And that was enough. One night in early spring, he sat on the porch with a beer and an old transistor radio playing doo-wop low enough to feel like a memory. The sky was that kind of gray that looked like it used to be blue. He stared out at the horizon and thought about Billy. He hadn't thought about Billy in weeks, maybe months, but now the face came back, sharp and full of life. The slicked back hair, the fast mouth, the way he walked into a room like the carpet rolled out for him. Billy didn't deserve what happened. Not like that. And Tommy. He'd been a ticking time bomb from day one. Henry knew that. Jimmy knew that. Hell, Tommy probably knew that. But they followed him anyway, backed him, covered for him, even cleaned up after him. And when it all came crashing down, Jimmy put the gun in his back like it was business. Henry helped dig the hole. You live long enough, and you start realizing most people don't die because they're bad. They die because they trusted the wrong guy to pour their next drink. That's the part that haunted Henry the most. Not the blood. Not the sound of bone cracking. Not the lie they told to the bosses or the lie he fed the feds. It was the trust. Because if you really look at the life, if you strip away the suits, the cars, the money, all that's left is who you trust. And Henry broke that. First with Billy, then with Jimmy. And finally, with himself. The next morning, there was a letter in his mailbox. No return address. Just a plain white envelope with his new name, scribbled by hand. He opened it on the porch. Inside was a single sheet of paper, torn from a notebook. You think you're safe. You're not. No signature, no smudges, no markings. Just those 7 words. And suddenly, the stillness was gone. The world that had felt empty now felt like it was watching. He didn't go to work that day, didn't call anyone, didn't eat. He just sat by the window, 38 on the table, blinds cracked just enough to see the street. Every car that passed slowed down too much. Every dog bark sounded like a warning. By nightfall, his hands were shaking so bad he dropped his drink. And that's when the knock came. 3 slow hits on the door, not loud, just enough to say, "I'm here." Henry froze, didn't breathe, didn't move. Another knock, then silence. He waited for what felt like forever before creeping to the door and looking through the peephole. No one. He opened the door just enough to peek out. Nothing but cold air and silence. No car, no footprints, no note. But he felt it. Someone had been there. He called DeMarco the next day, told him about the letter, told him about the knock. DeMarco sighed. "You sure it wasn't just some kid messing around?" "No kid writes like that." "You want a relocation?" Henry thought about it, then shook his head. What's the point? The truth was, he didn't want to run anymore. He was tired of changing names, changing towns, hiding behind curtains and fake IDs. If they wanted him, whoever they were, they'd find him. Mob guys, revenge seekers, hell, maybe even someone he'd crossed back in the day that didn't forget. Or maybe it was all in his head. Paranoia doesn't need proof, just silence. And Henry had plenty of that. 2 weeks passed, no letter, no knock, nothing. And then, one night at the bar, a man walked in wearing a leather jacket Henry hadn't seen in 15 years. He sat 2 stools down, ordered a beer. Didn't look Henry's way once, but Henry recognized him, not by name, not by face, by posture, by eyes. By the way he scanned the room without turning his head. He was from the life. Henry finished his drink and left before the guy could say a word. He walked back to the house in the rain, soaked and shivering by the time he reached the porch. Sat in the dark for hours, listening for footsteps. But none came, just the sound of the heater struggling against the wind. He didn't sleep. He didn't go back to the bar. He started using the back entrance to the store, eyes on the parking lot at all times. He stopped answering the phone. Didn't trust anyone, because the past wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the right moment to crawl out of the grave and remind him. There's no such thing as a clean escape. It had been almost 2 years since Henry entered witness protection. 2 years since he changed his name. 2 years since he sat across from Jimmy for the last time. 2 years since he signed away everything he thought made him who he was. And yet somehow, it still felt like yesterday. The government had moved him twice since the letter, once to a cramped apartment outside Minneapolis, and now to a 1-bedroom house near the Oregon border where the neighbors never asked questions and the weather stayed gray year-round. The kind of place where time moved like syrup and nobody cared who you used to be. But still, the ghosts followed. Billy, Tommy, Jimmy, and worse, the version of himself that used to believe in loyalty, in family, in the street. That version didn't die quickly. It died in pieces. Every time Henry looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the name on his ID. Every time he got groceries and introduced himself to the cashier like a stranger. Every time the radio played a song from the old days and his stomach turned. Lately, that weight had started to get heavier, and he didn't know what to do with it anymore. He started writing things down, not for anyone else. Not to publish or give to the feds or leave for some priest to read when he was gone. It was just for him, a way to unpack the memories before they crushed him. He kept a cheap notebook in the drawer next to the bed. The pages were bent, water-stained, creased from the nights he clutched it in his sleep. The first few pages were stiff, like he didn't want to admit to anything, not even on paper. But over time, the ink began to spill faster. Stories, moments, names, regrets. He wrote about the time he and Jimmy drove to Philly for a sit-down and ended up getting drunk in a motel room because the other crew never showed. He wrote about the look on Billy's face when the joke stopped being funny. He wrote about the night Tommy vanished and the silence Jimmy kept ever since. He wrote about his wife, how she used to hum when she cooked, and how that stopped long before he did. And then one night, he wrote one sentence that made him stop cold. I don't know who I am anymore. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the notebook. A few weeks later, something changed. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't someone showing up on the doorstep. It was a dream. Henry was walking through Brooklyn, the old Brooklyn, not the one with condos and cafes. The Brooklyn with cracked sidewalks and cigar smoke and guys playing dice in alleyways. He walked past Sal's Deli, past Louie's Bar, saw Frankie's Cadillac double parked in front of the old club, windows cracked just enough to hear Sinatra playing low. He walked past Jimmy, who didn't look at him, past Tommy, who smirked like nothing had ever happened. And then he saw Billy, standing alone in front of the bakery, brushing crumbs off his coat, smiling. Billy turned to him and said, "You still don't get it, do you?" Henry woke up in a cold sweat. He didn't sleep for 2 days after that. That dream stuck with him. It wasn't the first time he'd seen Billy in his sleep, but this one felt different. It didn't feel like guilt. It felt like a challenge, like someone telling him to look backward, really look, and understand what the hell all this was for. Because what was the point of running if you never figured out what you were running from? So that morning, Henry bought a bus ticket. To New York, not to the neighborhood. He wasn't that stupid, but close enough. A cheap motel in Queens, 2 hours from the old streets, far enough to stay hidden. Close enough to see. He didn't tell the marshals, Didn't activate the burner phone. He just packed a bag, pulled on a coat, and left. The city hit him like a fist to the chest, not because it was dangerous, because it was different. The buildings were taller, the voices louder, the streets unfamiliar in all the familiar places. The corner where Louis used to be, now a pharmacy. The butcher shop where Jimmy took envelopes every Thursday, now a vape store. The alley where Tommy once knocked out a bookie for shorting a loan, paved over with a security camera on every corner. The world had moved on, and that was the part that cut the deepest. Not the danger, not the ghosts, but the fact that it all kept turning without him. On the second day, he did something reckless. He went to the cemetery. He wore a hat low, glasses dark, kept his head down like a man who owed too many people too much money. He wandered the rows until he found what he was looking for. Billy Bentvena. The stone was modest, nothing fancy, just a name, some dates, and a single line beneath, loyal to the end. Henry stood there for a long time, didn't say anything, didn't cry, but he thought about what that meant, loyal to the end. Billy didn't talk, didn't fold, didn't scream, took the hits, took the betrayal, went down as a made man who died believing in something, even if the men around him didn't deserve it. Henry never told the feds where they buried him. Some things you don't give up, not even when you're already broken. He looked down at the grave and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then he walked away before someone recognized his walk. He stayed another night in the motel. Didn't leave the room, just sat on the bed, watching old movies on mute and eating food that tasted like cardboard. He didn't know why he came. Closure? Peace? A way to look the past in the eye before it caught up to him? But even now, it felt unfinished, like a conversation half-had. Maybe that's the truth nobody tells you about the life. It never really ends. You just stop answering the door. When he left New York, he didn't feel relief, but he felt settled, like he finally let himself admit that no matter how far he ran, the past would always be there, not behind him, inside him, and the only way to survive wasn't to forget. It was to remember and carry it, all of it. The ride back from New York was quieter than he expected. Even with the hiss of the bus tires on wet pavement, the hum of other passengers breathing, the occasional crackle of the radio up front, it all felt muted, like he was underwater. Henry kept his forehead against the glass for most of the trip, watching the world roll by in long stretches of highway and blurry streetlights. In the back of his mind, he thought maybe someone was following him, but nobody was. Because the truth was, there was no one left to chase him. Not Jimmy, not Tommy, not even the guys from the top, the ones who used to sit in quiet rooms and decide who got to live and who didn't. They were either in prison, in the dirt, or ghosts in someone else's story now. And Henry? Henry was just a shadow riding a bus under a fake name. The man he used to be was long gone, and the one who replaced him wasn't sure what came next. Back in Oregon, the house was still standing, still cold, still silent. No letters. No knocks. No sudden black cars parked on the side of the road. Just the sound of the wind through the trees and the heater coughing like a dying animal. He unpacked slowly, hung his coat by the door, put the old notebook back in the drawer. The notebook. That was the only thing he brought with him from the old life. Not photos, not jewelry, not even cash. Just pages filled with half-truths, memories, and regrets. He opened it again, flipped to the back where the last entry was written in New York, in that quiet motel room across the river from where it all started. It read, "I saw his grave. I said nothing. I think he already knew." Days blurred into each other after that. He went back to the grocery store job. Same aisles, same squeaky carts, same clerk who kept chewing gum like it owed her money. He nodded when people said good morning. He smiled when he didn't feel like it. He went home at night, ate quietly, sat in the same chair, and waited for sleep like it was permission he no longer had. Sometimes he dreamed of Jimmy, not the last version, cold, distant, furious, No, the young Jimmy. Sharp suit, rolled sleeves, hair slicked back, voice full of that crooked charm that could convince a man to rob a bank and feel grateful for the opportunity. In the dreams, Jimmy always asked him the same thing. You ever wonder if we were just chasing ghosts? And Henry never had an answer. The worst part of living in exile isn't loneliness, it's irrelevance. He'd spent years thinking someone would come for him, someone from the old life, maybe a cousin of Billy's, maybe one of those third-tier guys with something to prove. But no one did. Because no one cared. The machine kept turning. And once you stepped out of it, the parts just replaced you. You don't leave the life and get remembered. You get forgotten. And slowly, Henry began to understand something that kept him up more than guilt ever did. He wasn't hiding from them anymore. He was hiding from himself. One afternoon in early May, he got a letter. Real envelope, real stamp, no markings. Inside was a photo, black and white, faded. It was of him, Jimmy, and Tommy, standing outside Louie's bar in the summer of '71. They were younger, thinner, drunk off cheap whiskey, and that early arrogance that makes young men feel untouchable. In the photo, Tommy had his arm around Henry. Jimmy was lighting a cigarette with that half grin of his. Henry was laughing. On the back, written in smudged ink, "We were kings. Now look at us." That was it. No return address, no threats, just a message from the past, or what was left of it. He stared at it for a long time, turned it over in his hands, held it to the light like the faces might speak if he looked hard enough. Then he tucked it into the notebook, between 2 pages that talked about Billy. And he didn't write anything new that day. A week later, he skipped work. Not because he was sick, but because something in his chest finally cracked open and whispered, "This is all there is now. Do something with it." So he drove. No destination. Just out. Miles of trees, gas stations, roads with numbers instead of names. He drove until the sky turned pink and the sun dipped behind the hills, and he pulled over at a rest stop, got out, stretched his legs. Walked behind the building to a bench that faced nothing but empty land. And there, under a sky that didn't know his name, he finally said it. I miss them. Not just Jimmy, not just Tommy, even Billy in a way. Because for all the blood, the lies, the betrayals, those were his people. They knew him. They knew the parts of him that were too ugly to say out loud, and they stayed anyway. Until they didn't. That night, he wrote again. This time, it was a letter. Not to anyone in particular. Just out. Dear whoever finds this, I don't know what makes a man, but I know what breaks one. It's not jail. It's not violence. It's not even betrayal. It's silence. It's living in a world where no one knows your name, where your stories have no weight, where the people you built a life around are all just names in a file or dirt in the ground. I did things. Some of them I regret. Some of them I'd do again. I was part of something once. Not good, not noble, but real. Now I'm just a ghost in my own life. And maybe that's the punishment I earned. But if you're reading this and you ever think about stepping into the life, ask yourself what you're willing to lose. Because it won't ask. It'll just take. H. He folded the letter, put it in the back of the notebook. Then he sat on the porch and watched the sun rise. Not because anything was better, not because he had peace, but because for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like running. 2 months passed after the letter to no one. And in that time, Henry settled back into his rhythm, if you could call it that. Wake up, make coffee, read the paper, go to work, say nothing, come home. Stare out the window until it got dark. He wasn't expecting anything anymore. Not another photo, not another letter, not a knock at the door. If anything, he was expecting nothing, which made what happened next feel like a punch to the chest. It came in the form of a voicemail, one he almost didn't listen to, the kind you delete before it finishes the first word. But something in the caller's voice stopped him. It wasn't official. It wasn't threatening. It was tired. And that's what made it dangerous. Hey, My name's Paul Bentvena. I'm Billy's nephew. I know who you are. I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to talk. That's all. You can hang up on me. You can block me. But I'll be in your town in 3 days. Motel 8 off exit 94, room 11. If you want to finally look a man in the eye and say it, I'll be there. Click. That was it. No shouting, no ultimatum, just a man offering a door that could stay closed or open wide. Henry didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't know what it meant. Who the hell was this kid? What did he know? What did he want? He ran through all the possibilities. Maybe it was a setup. Maybe Paul was working with someone, trying to draw him out, make him break cover, but none of it felt right. The voice on the phone didn't have revenge in it. It had something worse. Conviction. The voice of a man who had lived his life in shadow just from the other side. The side that buried someone and never got answers. 3 days later, Henry stood in front of Motel 8, staring at the door to room 11. He hadn't planned on coming. He'd written it off at first, had told himself it was too risky, too messy, too close to everything he'd been trying to outrun. But the silence afterward was worse than the fear. It gnawed at him, ate through his ribs like acid. He needed to know, not for closure, not for peace, just to see, to face something that wasn't a memory for once. He knocked, once, twice. The door opened a few seconds later. Paul Bentvena was maybe 40, clean-shaven, thin, dressed like a man who didn't have a lot but took care of what he did. His eyes were dark, heavy, but not angry. They stared at each other for a moment, not as strangers, but as men standing on opposite ends of a history neither one could escape. "You came," Paul said. Henry nodded. "I wasn't sure I would." Paul stepped aside. "You want to sit?" The room was plain. Twin beds, a lamp with a broken shade, 2 plastic cups half filled with motel ice water. No suitcases, no briefcase, no recording equipment. Paul sat on the bed nearest the door. Henry sat across from him. No one spoke for almost a full minute. Then, Paul broke the silence. "I was 12 when Billy died." Henry kept his hands folded in his lap. "He was like a god to me. Walked into our house like he owned the sun. My mother used to make him pasta every Sunday, and he'd eat like the world was ending." He paused. "And then one day, he just disappeared." Henry didn't move. "They told us it was business, that he went underground, that maybe he ran to avoid some heat. But you know what my mom always said?" He looked Henry in the eye. She said, "They killed him. Probably the people he trusted most." Henry swallowed, but said nothing. "I didn't believe it. Not at first. I thought, no way. He was made. You don't just touch made guys. You don't just wipe them off the map without the whole city going up in flames." Paul's voice dropped to a whisper. But the city stayed quiet. And that silence, that's when I knew. Henry leaned back in the chair. "You want me to say it?" he asked. Paul nodded. "No cops, no courtroom, no deals. I just want to hear it. From you. Just once. So I know I'm not crazy." Henry looked at the wall for a long time. Then finally he said it. He disrespected someone who didn't understand restraint, and I didn't stop it. None of us did. We were young, stupid, scared of the wrong things. Paul nodded. Henry kept going. "He died hard, not clean, not quick. He deserved better." And then silence again. Paul didn't cry, didn't shout, just sat there, soaking in the words. After a long pause, he asked, "Did he know it was coming?" Henry closed his eyes. No, not until the very last second. Paul looked down, then stood up, walked to the sink, poured out his water, and said, "That's all I needed." Henry stood, unsure what to do next, but Paul wasn't finished. "One more thing," he said. "You carry it?" Henry didn't hesitate. "Every day." Paul nodded. Then, quietly, "Good." And he opened the door. Outside, the sky was turning dark, clouds rolling in, thunder somewhere far away. Henry got in his car and sat for a long time without starting the engine. He didn't feel better, didn't feel relieved, but he felt. For the first time in a long time, something in him had stirred. Not peace, not forgiveness, just weight shifting. Like something he'd been holding on to finally moved, an inch maybe. But that was enough. That night, back at his house, Henry took out the notebook, opened it to a blank page, wrote 3 words. He knew now. Then he closed it, placed it on the table, and looked out the window as the rain began to fall. Not everything had been said. Not everything could be forgiven. But for once, he hadn't run. And in this life, that counted for something. The days after Henry met Paul Bentvena passed in strange silence. Not the kind he was used to, the heavy, choking quiet that came with fear and hiding. This silence was different, lighter in a way, still cold, still sharp, but no longer suffocating. He'd told the truth, or at least his truth, and even though it didn't make the past disappear, it made the weight feel movable. It wasn't peace, but it was something. He didn't change much after that. Still woke up at 6. Still drank black coffee from the same chipped mug. Still walked to work with his hands in his pockets and his eyes low. But something inside had shifted. Not outward. No one would have noticed. The girl at the register still called him Mr. H. The manager still gave him grief about checking in deliveries late. But Henry felt it. The past hadn't let him go. But for the first time in decades, it had spoken back without trying to strangle him. The next letter arrived exactly 2 weeks after his meeting with Paul. This time, it wasn't cryptic. No anonymous threat, no photo from another life. Just an envelope addressed in clean handwriting. Return address: a halfway house in Newark, New Jersey. Sender: Frankie Marinelli. That name hit like a gut punch. Frankie had been one of the old crew, a quiet guy who never made waves, never took a side unless he had to. The kind of man who cleaned up after bigger messes than he made. Back in the day, Jimmy once said, "Frankie's the kind of guy who disappears for 5 years and still remembers your birthday when he comes back." Henry hadn't thought of him in forever. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside, a single sheet. "Heard you talk to Paul. That took guts. Some people never face what they did. Some bury it so deep they forget it was ever theirs to carry. You didn't. I respect that. I'm out. Clean for now. Trying to keep it that way. Just wanted you to know. People still talk. Not out loud, not with names, but they talk. Some say you sold everyone out. Some say you're dead. I don't say anything, but I remember who you were. If you ever feel like saying more, I'm here." There was no number, no pressure. Just a hand extended from the deep end. Henry read it 3 times, then folded it up and slid it into the notebook, right between his letter to whoever finds this, and the final page that simply said, he knew now. He didn't know why, but the letter felt heavier than the one from Paul. Maybe because Paul had wanted answers. But Frankie? Frankie just wanted honesty. And in this life, that was even rarer. That night, Henry stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. He looked at the lines in his face, the tired eyes, the sag in his shoulders. He didn't see a gangster. Didn't see a rat either. Just a man no longer sure what he was. And maybe that was the truth nobody liked to say out loud. Once the life spits you out, it doesn't give you a new one. It just leaves you standing there, asking what the hell you're supposed to do with the time you've got left. He called Frankie the next day, tracked down the halfway house, left a message. 2 days later, Frankie called back. They didn't talk long. Didn't talk about the old days, didn't mention names, didn't say Billy or Tommy or Jimmy. They just talked like 2 guys who had been burned by the same fire and were now sitting on opposite sides of the same ash pile. At the end of the call, Frankie said something that stuck. "You ever think about putting it all down? Not in a letter, not for some priest, just the whole story, every piece, start to finish." Henry hesitated. "I don't think anyone wants to hear it." Frankie laughed softly. "That's the thing, brother. They don't. But you need to say it anyway." That night, Henry opened the notebook. The old one was nearly full now. Pages stuffed with memories, scribbled margins, smudged ink. It read like a confession, a journal, a final will. And yet, it didn't feel done. So he pulled a fresh one from the drawer. Blank pages, clean slate. And he began again. The first time I ever heard the word respect, I was 6. My old man said it after a fight with some drunk at the grocery store. He didn't throw a punch, just stood there, teeth clenched, jaw locked, and said, "Respect goes both ways, pal." That stuck with me, but I didn't really understand what it meant until years later, when I saw what it looked like to have it and what it looked like to lose it. He wrote for hours that night, about Brooklyn, about the club, about the sit-downs that never got recorded and the blood that never made it to the news. He wrote about the time he stole a coat off a sleeping man in Penn Station and returned it the next day because the guy reminded him of his uncle. He wrote about how guilt doesn't come in waves. It comes in drips, like a leak in the ceiling you ignore until your whole house rots. He wrote about how silence can be loud and how the hardest thing in this life isn't killing, it's surviving afterward. A week passed, then 2. By the 3rd, the second notebook was half full. And something strange started to happen. Henry began to feel awake, not happy, not healed, but present. He started drinking less, took longer walks, started answering calls without flinching. He wasn't looking over his shoulder anymore, because the fear, the deep, choking fear, had turned into something else. Understanding. He'd made choices. He'd buried things. He'd betrayed friends and followed monsters and let a man die without stopping it. But he wasn't hiding anymore, and that made him more dangerous than he'd ever been. At the end of that 3rd week, a package arrived. Plain brown box, no return label. Inside, a 3rd notebook, hardcover, leather, unused, and a note. "Keep going. F." Henry sat down at the table, the sun beginning to rise through the kitchen window. He looked at the notebooks. The old one, guilt. The second, memory. This one, he didn't know yet, but he opened it anyway and began again. The letter came on a Tuesday, typed, neatly folded, professional. The kind of letter that didn't ask for attention, it assumed it. "Dear Mr. Hill, my name is Claire Grayson. I'm a freelance journalist working on a long-form piece about the families affected by organized crime in the 70s and 80s. Not the wise guys, but the ones left behind. I recently spoke with Paul Bentvena, who mentioned your conversation. He said it didn't give him peace, but it gave him something else. Truth. I know your story has been told before, in books, in films, in whispers, but I'm not looking for the headlines. I'm looking for the man. I'm writing to ask one thing. Will you talk to me? Off the record. No cameras, just words. I can come to you. Respectfully. Claire Grayson." Henry stared at the letter for over an hour. It didn't piss him off. It didn't make him nervous. It made him curious. In a lifetime of men with guns, lawyers with briefcases, and feds with wiretaps, nobody had ever just asked him to speak. Without agenda. Without pressure. Just a question. "Will you talk to me?" He didn't respond for 3 days. Not because he didn't want to. He just didn't know what version of himself she'd be talking to. Was he the street kid from Brownsville who idolized Jimmy and laughed at Tommy's cruelty? Was he the man who watched Billy die and stayed silent? Was he the guy who broke the code? Or was he just some retired nobody bagging groceries under a name the government slapped on him? He didn't know. But on the 4th day, he typed a letter back. "Claire, I'll talk. But you don't get to ask about the murders. You don't get to ask about who pulled the trigger. You don't get to play detective and dig up graves I already buried. If you want to talk to the man, not the myth, not the rat, not the story, then I'll give you 1 hour. No tape, no pen. Just eyes and ears. You come to me, and if I don't like the way it feels, it ends. H." She showed up 5 days later, early, no makeup, wearing a plain coat and jeans with a messenger bag slung across her chest like a student who forgot to drop out. She couldn't have been more than 30. Henry opened the door and said nothing. She didn't try to shake his hand. "Thanks for letting me come." He stepped aside. 1 hour, she nodded. "Understood." They sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of black coffee between them, rain against the window. She didn't open her bag, didn't reach for a recorder, just sat with her hands folded, waiting. Henry studied her face, not the way he used to size up guys in the street, looking for weakness, tells, fear. This was different. She didn't seem nervous, just present. Finally, she said, "You've been written about for decades." Henry gave a short laugh. "Yeah, and every version makes me worse." She smiled faintly. "I'm not here to defend you or judge you." "Then what are you here for?" "I want to understand why you lived." That hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back in the chair, took a sip of the coffee. "Why I lived," he repeated. "Yeah," she said. "Everyone else, Billy, Tommy, Jimmy, they're all gone. Buried, locked up, erased. But you're still here. You flipped, sure. You survived. But that's not the same as living." He looked down at the table. "No, it's not. So why did you?" He didn't answer right away, because that question wasn't about facts. It was about soul. And Henry hadn't looked his in the face for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "I lived because I was scared, not of dying. Of being forgotten, of going out without anyone knowing what really happened." Claire stayed silent. "I watched people die for pride, for power, for being too damn stubborn to bend when the wind changed. I saw what loyalty costs. I saw what silence buys. And I figured, if I'm going to die anyway, I want someone to remember who I really was." He looked at her. "Not the gangster, not the rat. Just the guy who made too many wrong choices and ran out of exits." She nodded. "So this," she gestured to the house, "this is your version of redemption?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just punishment. I don't know." She leaned in a little. "What do you miss most?" He laughed bitterly. "The noise." "The noise?" "Yeah. The street, the cars, the shouting, the dumb arguments over nothing, the feeling that something mattered, even when it didn't." He took another sip. "You sit in silence long enough, you start hearing your own mistakes talk back." She didn't write anything down, didn't ask for details, just listened. And Henry kept going, like something had broken open and didn't want to close yet. He told her about the photo, the one with Jimmy and Tommy outside the bar. He told her about the grave, the letter from Frankie, the notebooks he'd filled, page after page, trying to stitch together the man from the myth. Finally, he said, "You still want the story?" Claire looked at him. "Yes, but not the one everyone else told." "Then ask me the right question." She thought for a moment, then asked, "If you could go back to the beginning, would you choose the life again?" Henry's throat tightened. He didn't expect that one. He looked at the window. The rain had stopped. "Honestly?" She nodded. "No." She waited. He continued. "I got in because I thought it was family, thought it meant something. And maybe it did for a while. But I watched it eat people from the inside out. Watched good men turn evil and evil men become legends. I watched respect turn into fear and loyalty turn into silence." He leaned forward. "I'd rather have been a nobody with a quiet conscience than a somebody with a body count." Claire said nothing for a long time. Then she smiled. Not a soft smile. Not pity. Respect. "I think that's the truest thing I've heard all year." Henry let out a slow breath. "Time's up." She stood, reached for her bag. "I'm not going to publish anything you said. Not unless you want me to." "I meant that." "I know. But if you ever want someone to read the notebooks..." She let the offer hang, then turned, walked to the door, and paused. "You did more than survive, Henry. You remembered. That's harder." Then she was gone. That night, Henry sat at the table with the third notebook, opened to a blank page, and wrote, "She asked the right question." The days after Claire left felt strange. Not heavy, not light, just clear. The kind of clarity you don't get from prayer or punishment, only from truth. And not the kind you shout or defend, the kind you whisper to yourself in the mirror, finally too tired to lie. Henry still went through the motions. Coffee, work, walks, the same small town faces, the same dull roads. But something inside had changed. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was deciding. He started reading his old notebooks again, not to remember, He remembered it all, but to see what was worth keeping, what was just noise, and what still held weight. The first notebook was messy, raw, full of guilt, half-sentences, scribbled names, rants, pleas, things he couldn't bring himself to say out loud. The second was more careful, chronological, structured, the real story, start to finish. Brooklyn to Billy, Tommy to the flight, Jimmy to the grave. And the third? The third wasn't done yet. But it was different. That one wasn't about the life. It was about after. About carrying silence like a suitcase. About what it means to keep breathing when all your brothers are buried. About wondering every morning whether waking up is a blessing or a sentence. One night, just before fall turned the trees brittle and red, Henry sat with all three notebooks on the table. No TV, no radio, just him, and everything he had left to say. And that's when he made the decision. He was going to give it to her, to Claire, not to publish, not unless she wanted to, but because someone had to hold the truth. Not the movies, not the papers, not the cops, not the bosses who were either dead or praying in prison chapels for sins they never confessed. A real person, someone who asked the right questions, someone who still believed the truth meant something. He wrote her a letter that night, typed it, folded it, mailed it from the next town over. No return address, just a P.O. box he rented under a name that didn't exist. Claire, the notebooks are real. They're yours now. I'm not giving them to clear my name. I'm giving them because when I'm gone, I want the right version of me to stay. Not the headlines, not the court records, not the Hollywood script, just the words of a man who made every mistake twice and still came back to write it down. They're not pretty, but they're true. When you're ready, come get them. H. She came back a week later, didn't say much. He had the notebook stacked and wrapped in a brown cloth. No titles, no labels, just stories. When he handed them to her, her eyes didn't shine. She didn't say thank you, she just nodded. The kind of nod people give when something matters more than they can say. Henry asked her one thing. Will you change the names? She shook her head. No, but I'll tell the truth. He laughed. That's the problem with the truth. It doesn't care who it kills. Claire said. That's why it needs someone who does. And then she left. And Henry felt something strange. Relief. Not because he was safe, but because now the truth didn't die with him. He stopped writing after that. Not out of fatigue, but because there was nothing left to say. The words had done their work. And he had given them away. His days grew simpler. Work, books, walks in silence. He stopped checking his rearview mirror, stopped flinching at knocks on the door, because there was no one left to fear. Even the ghosts were quieter now. They still came sometimes, in dreams, in music, in the way sunlight hit the porch on certain mornings. But they didn't accuse him anymore. They just stood there, like old friends waiting at the corner. A month passed, then another. No word from Claire, no phone call, no email. Henry didn't mind. He didn't want to see it in print, didn't want to see himself quoted, didn't want to be explained. He just wanted to be heard, once, by someone who didn't already have a verdict in mind. And he had been. That was enough. One night in early winter, Henry walked outside just before midnight. Sky full of stars, cold air biting the edges of his lungs. He stood on the porch in silence, looking out at nothing. And he thought, I lived. Not well, not clean, but I lived. Then he smiled. A small thing, but real. Inside, the last page of his third notebook sat open, 3 words scribbled weeks earlier. Nothing left hidden. The first snowfall came early that year, soft, slow, like a blanket being lowered over the town. It painted everything in silence. The rooftops, the bare trees, the roads he'd walked every day for years. And as the world hushed, so did Henry. There was no drama to it, no sickness. No sudden collapse, just a gradual slowing. He stopped going to work, stopped waking up with the alarm, stopped waiting for letters, calls, or knocks that had long since stopped coming. Instead, he spent his days by the window with a cup of tea, not coffee anymore, and stared at the frost gathering in corners of the glass. He'd watch the wind shake the pines and think about nothing in particular. Some days he opened his notebooks again, not to add anything, but to feel the pages in his hands, the weight of what he'd lived, the things he'd survived, the names written in the margins, the ghosts. They were quieter now, not gone, but not screaming anymore. Just present. Claire never published the notebooks, at least not right away. She sent him a letter, a real one, saying she'd read them, every word. She said they broke her heart. Not because of the violence, not because of the betrayal, but because underneath all the blood and silence, there was a boy who only wanted to belong. She didn't ask him for permission to share them. She asked him if he wanted them to be remembered. Henry didn't respond, but he left her a message 2 days later. Do what you think is right. Just don't let them turn it into a story about monsters. We were people, just broken ones. By the end of January, Henry stopped going outside. The cold hurt more than it used to. His hands didn't grip the mug like they once did. His knees didn't like stairs. And the nights stretched longer than sleep could keep up with. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The fear had left him the same way the people had. Slow, inevitable, without explanation. He didn't want a funeral. Didn't want a priest. Didn't want anyone pretending he was something he wasn't. So he wrote one last letter. To whoever finds me, if I'm gone, don't go looking for relatives. I don't have any left. If you find a box of notebooks, give them to a woman named Claire Grayson. She'll know what to do with them. Don't call the paper. Don't call the FBI. Don't turn this into a headline. I was a criminal. I was a liar. I was a coward. But I told the truth in the end. And maybe that's the best I could do. Henry. He passed away quietly one morning. The woman who ran the market noticed he hadn't come in for bread. The landlord found him by the window, sitting up, eyes closed, like he was just taking a nap. There were no pictures on the walls, no trophies, no medals, no newspaper clippings, just the notebooks. And the truth. Claire came 3 days later. She packed up the house herself, took the notebooks, the last letter, the third coffee mug Henry never used. She didn't cry. She just stood in the center of that quiet little home and whispered, "You did it, old man. You finished it." 6 months later, she published a book. Not a crime expose, not a scandal piece, not a tell-all, just a quiet memoir. Titled simply, The Man Who Told the Truth. She didn't put his real name on the cover, just an opening dedication. For those who lived it, for those who buried it, for those who survived it long enough to tell the story right. The book didn't go viral, didn't hit bestseller lists, but it landed where it mattered, in libraries, in schools, in the hands of kids who were just like Henry once was, angry, proud, desperate to belong to something, and in the end, it told them the truth. Not just about the life, but about the cost of silence, the danger of loyalty without limits, and the power of memory. No statues were built, no documentaries followed, but for the first time, the world heard his story. Not the gangster, not the witness, just Henry. And in that, he became something none of them ever did, whole. In the final pages of the book, Claire included a scanned note, written in Henry's handwriting, one line only, the last line of his last notebook. If you're reading this, then I didn't die a liar.